The desert sun hung high in the cloudless sky as Delilah Vance stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, 1878. Her green eyes squinted against the harsh brightness while she clutched her small travel case, the only possession she'd managed to salvage after the fire that had claimed both her home and her father back in St. Louis. The telegram from her uncle offering her a position as the town's schoolteacher had been her salvation, though she knew nothing of teaching or of surviving in this untamed wilderness. "Miss Vance." A round-faced woman with graying hair approached. "I'm Mrs. Hollister, wife of the general store owner. We've been expecting you." Delilah managed a weak smile, her throat parched from the journey. "Thank you for meeting me." As Mrs. Hollister led her toward the town's single dusty street, Delilah's attention was drawn to a commotion outside the saloon. A tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered hat stood arguing with the barkeeper, his voice carrying across the street. "I told you, Daniels, I'll settle my tab when the cattle sale goes through next week." His deep voice resonated with frustration. "That's what you said last month, Drake." The barkeeper crossed his arms. "I've got a business to run." Mrs. Hollister clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "That's Darren Young, owns the Running Y Ranch about 10 miles outside town, been having a rough go of it since his wife passed 3 years back." Delilah couldn't help but stare at the cowboy. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was something commanding about his presence. A small boy, no more than 7 years old, stood by his side, looking up at him with worried eyes. "And that's his son, Jacob," Mrs. Hollister added. "Poor child barely remembers his mother." As they passed, the boy noticed Delilah and tugged on his father's sleeve, causing the cowboy to glance in her direction. Their eyes met briefly, his a stormy blue that seemed to pierce straight through her before he tipped his hat and turned back to his argument. Delilah felt a strange fluttering in her chest as she followed Mrs. Hollister to her new accommodations, a small room attached to the schoolhouse that would serve as both her classroom and her home. That evening, after Mrs. Hollister had helped her settle in and left her with a basket of provisions, Delilah sat on her narrow bed, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. She knew nothing of this wild country of these people or of teaching children. But with nowhere else to go, she had no choice but to make this work. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Cautiously, she approached and called out, "Who is it?" "Jacob Young, madam," came a small voice. Curious, Delilah opened the door to find the boy she'd seen earlier standing alone on her doorstep, his hands clasped behind his back. "Hello," she said, glancing around for his father. "Is everything all right?" Jacob nodded solemnly. "Mrs. Hollister said you're going to be our new teacher." "That's right, classes begin next week." A shy smile crossed his face as he brought his hands forward, revealing a slightly crushed desert mariposa lily. "I brought you this," he said, offering it to her. "Pa smiles when you're near." Delilah blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry." "That's what he said," Jacob explained. "When we saw you today. He hasn't smiled since Ma died, but he did when he saw you. He told me you had pretty eyes like the hills after the spring rain." Heat rushed to Delilah's cheeks as she accepted the flower. "That's very kind of him to say." "He didn't say I should tell you," Jacob added quickly. "But I thought maybe if you knew, you might come visit our ranch sometime. Pa gets lonely." Before Delilah could respond, a familiar deep voice called out, "Jacob, where'd you get off to, boy?" Darren Young appeared at the edge of the schoolyard, his face shifting from concern to embarrassment when he spotted his son at Delilah's door. He strode toward them, spurs jingling with each step. "I apologize, madam," he said, removing his hat. "My boy has a habit of wandering off when my back is turned." "It's no trouble," Delilah replied, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance after the long journey. "He was just welcoming me to town." Darren's eyes fell to the flower in her hand and his expression darkened slightly. "Jacob, did you pick that from Mrs. Miller's garden again?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. Found it growing wild by the creek." Darren regarded his son skeptically before turning back to Delilah. I'm Darren Young, madam. We own the Running Y Ranch just outside of town. Delilah Vance, she replied, offering her hand. The new schoolteacher. His large, calloused hand enveloped hers, warm and strong. A pleasure, Miss Vance. We're glad to have you here. This town's been without proper schooling for too long. Their eyes met again, and Delilah felt that same flutter in her chest. There was a sadness behind his gaze, a weariness that belied his strong exterior. I hope I can live up to expectations, she said, withdrawing her hand, though I must admit I have little teaching experience. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You'll do fine. The children here aren't expecting much, just someone who cares enough to try. Jacob tugged at his father's sleeve. I invited Miss Vance to visit our ranch, Pa. Darren's eyes widened slightly. Jacob, that's not appropriate. I'd be happy to visit sometime, Delilah interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Perhaps after I've settled in and begun classes. Darren studied her face as if trying to determine her sincerity. You're welcome anytime, Miss Vance, though I should warn you it's not much to look at these days. Pa's trying to save the ranch, Jacob explained earnestly, but it's hard without Ma to help. Jacob, Darren admonished gently, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Miss Vance doesn't need to hear our troubles. He turned to Delilah with an apologetic smile. We should let you rest. You've had a long journey. Delilah nodded, clutching the flower. Thank you both for the welcome. I look forward to seeing Jacob in class next week. As they walked away, Jacob turned to wave, and Delilah couldn't help but notice the way Darren's hand protectively gripped his son's shoulder, a father doing his best in difficult circumstances. Closing the door, Delilah placed the lily in a cup of water and sat back on her bed, thoughts of the weathered cowboy and his earnest son filling her mind. Perhaps Cottonwood Springs wouldn't be so lonely after all. The first week of school passed in a blur of names, faces, and lessons hastily prepared the night before. To Delilah's surprise, she found herself enjoying the challenge. The children of Cottonwood Springs, though rambunctious, were eager to learn, and she discovered a natural talent for teaching that she'd never known she possessed. Jacob Young proved to be one of her brightest students, always the first to raise his hand and the last to leave at the end of the day. Often, he would linger, helping her clean the chalkboard or organize books, filling the quiet schoolroom with stories about life on the ranch. It was Friday afternoon when Darren Young appeared in the schoolhouse doorway just as Delilah was gathering her things. Miss Vance, he said, hat in hand. I hope I'm not intruding. Delilah smoothed her skirt self-consciously. Not at all, Mr. Young. Jacob just left with the others. Actually, I came to see you. He stepped inside, his tall frame seeming to fill the small schoolroom. Jacob hasn't stopped talking about you all week. I wanted to thank you for being so patient with him. He's a wonderful boy, Delilah replied honestly. Very bright. Darren nodded, pride evident in his eyes. His mother would be pleased to hear that. She always wanted him to get a proper education. A moment of silence stretched between them, tinged with the ghost of his loss. Mr. Young, Delilah began, gathering her courage, Jacob mentioned that your ranch has been struggling. His expression hardened slightly. My son talks too much. He cares about you, she said softly. And I've been wondering if there might be a way I could help. Darren's eyebrows rose in surprise. Help? Miss Vance, with all due respect, what would a city lady like you know about ranching? Nothing, she admitted with a small laugh. But I'm a quick learner. And I have some experience with bookkeeping from helping my father's business in St. Louis. Perhaps I could assist with your accounts, or I don't need charity, he interrupted, his voice gruff. It's not charity, she insisted. It's an exchange. You could teach me about ranch life and I could help with your books. When he still looked skeptical, she added, think of it as continuing education for your son's teacher. Darren studied her for a long moment, then a reluctant smile crept across his face. You're persistent, aren't you? When I need to be. He shook his head, chuckling softly. All right, Miss Vance, if you're serious, I could use some help sorting out my finances. The bank's breathing down my neck and numbers were never my strong suit. Relief washed through her. Wonderful, when shall we start? Sunday afternoon, he suggested. I can send someone to fetch you after church service. Delilah nodded, excitement bubbling in her chest. Sunday would be perfect. As promised, a wagon arrived for Delilah after Sunday service. To her surprise, Darren himself sat at the reins, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt beneath his worn leather vest. Jacob sat beside him, beaming when he spotted her. The journey to the Running Y Ranch took nearly an hour, giving Delilah ample time to appreciate the stark beauty of the Arizona landscape. Rolling hills dotted with saguaro cacti stretched to the horizon, their sharp silhouettes striking against the clear blue sky. It's beautiful out here, she commented as they crested a hill overlooking a verdant valley. This is the Running Y, Darren announced, a note of pride in his voice despite the ranch's visible state of disrepair. A modest wooden house stood at the center, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. In the distance, cattle grazed on the sparse vegetation. It's not what it once was, he admitted as they approached, but it's home. Jacob jumped from the wagon as soon as it stopped, eager to show Delilah around. Can I take Miss Vance to see the new calves, Pa? Darren nodded. Just be careful near the corral, that new bull's still getting used to the place. Delilah spent the next hour being led around the ranch by an enthusiastic Jacob, who seemed to know every animal by name. She met the ranch hands, two weathered cowboys named Hank and Charlie, who tipped their hats respectfully and admired the spring calves with their spindly legs and curious eyes. When they returned to the house, Darren was waiting with a stack of ledgers and papers spread across the kitchen table. Hope you're still feeling helpful, he said, gesturing to the chaotic pile. 3 years of poor record-keeping right there. Delilah rolled up her sleeves. Let's get started. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, Delilah and Darren worked side by side, sorting through bills, receipts, and loan papers. Jacob occupied himself with drawing pictures at the far end of the table, occasionally bringing them to Delilah for approval. Your situation isn't as dire as you might think, Delilah said finally, setting down her pencil. You're behind on the bank loan, yes, but your cattle herd is growing. If you can hold on until the autumn drive, you should be able to clear most of your debts. Darren leaned back in his chair, relief evident on his face. That's the best news I've had in months. You just needed an outside perspective, she said with a smile, and perhaps a bit more organization going forward. Are you offering your services long-term, Miss Vance? His tone was light, but his eyes held a serious question. Before she could answer, Jacob appeared at her elbow with another drawing. Look, Miss Vance, I drew you teaching at our ranch. Delilah examined the childish sketch, which showed a stick figure with long hair standing beside a house that was presumably the ranch. Several smaller stick figures, cattle, perhaps, surrounded her. It's lovely, Jacob, she said, touched by the boy's inclusion of her in his vision of home. Jacob, Darren said, a note of warning in his voice. Miss Vance is our teacher and our friend. She has her own life in town, but she could visit more, Jacob insisted. She makes everything better. Even you smile more when she's here. Darren's face flushed and he stood abruptly. That's enough, son. Why don't you go help Charlie with the evening feed? After Jacob reluctantly departed, an awkward silence fell between them. I'm sorry about that, Darren said finally. He gets notions in his head sometimes. There's no need to apologize, Delilah assured him. He's a sweet boy who wants his father to be happy. Darren's eyes met hers, vulnerability evident in their blue depths. It's been just the two of us for so long, I sometimes forget how much he notices. Children see more than we give them credit for, Delilah said softly. He nodded, then seemed to make a decision. Would you stay for dinner, Miss Vance? Nothing fancy, just beans, biscuits, and whatever Charlie's managed to hunt this week. I'd be delighted, she replied, her heart quickening at the invitation. As the weeks passed, Delilah's Sunday visits to the Running Y became a regular occurrence. What began as financial assistance evolved into something more: shared meals, stories exchanged by lamplight, and quiet moments watching the sunset from the front porch. She taught Jacob to read more complex books, helped Darren draft letters to cattle buyers, and even learned to ride a gentle mare named Daisy that Darren set aside for her use. The ranch began to flourish under their combined efforts. With Delilah's organizational skills and Darren's knowledge of cattle, they managed to negotiate better terms with the bank and secure contracts for the fall drive that would ensure the ranch's survival. One warm evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching Jacob chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Darren turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You've changed things around here, Delilah," he said, using her first name as he'd begun to do in private. "Not just the ranch, but us. You've done all the hard work," she replied modestly. "I've just helped with the numbers." He shook his head. "It's more than that. You've brought light back into this place." He hesitated, then added quietly, "into me." Delilah's breath caught in her throat as he reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gently entwining with hers. "I know I'm just a rough cowboy with nothing much to offer," he continued, his voice husky with emotion. "But these past weeks, having you here, it's made me remember what it's like to look forward to each day." "Darren," she whispered, her heart pounding, "you have so much to offer, your strength, your kindness, your determination." She squeezed his hand. "I've come to care for you and Jacob very deeply." His eyes searched hers in the fading light. "Is it enough to build something on?" Before she could answer, Jacob's excited voice interrupted them. "Pa, Miss Vance, look what I caught." They sprang apart as the boy bounded onto the porch, his cupped hands containing a glowing firefly. "Very impressive," Delilah said, trying to compose herself. As Jacob released the insect back into the night, Darren's eyes caught hers over his son's head, the question still lingering between them. That night, as Darren drove her back to town beneath a canopy of stars, neither mentioned their interrupted conversation. But when he helped her down from the wagon outside the schoolhouse, his hands lingered at her waist, and she found herself stepping closer to him rather than away. "Delilah," he murmured, his face inches from hers, "I haven't felt this way since Catherine. It scares me half to death." "It scares me too," she admitted, "but not enough to stop." His lips met hers then, gentle at first, then with growing urgency, his arms pulling her closer until she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said reluctantly. She nodded, though everything in her wanted him to stay. "Will I see you Sunday?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The summer months brought prosperity to the Running Y. Under Delilah's guidance, Darren invested in new breeding stock and hired 2 more hands to help with the expanding herd. The autumn cattle drive promised to be the most profitable in years, potentially clearing all the ranch's outstanding debts. In town, tongues wagged about the schoolteacher's frequent visits to the young ranch, but Delilah found she cared little for gossip. Her feelings for Darren had grown from tentative attraction to something deep and abiding, and Jacob had claimed a special place in her heart as well. Their relationship blossomed in quiet moments, dawn rides across the ranch land, evenings spent reading to Jacob by lamplight, stolen kisses when they thought no one was looking. Darren spoke of Catherine sometimes, sharing memories of his late wife with a gentle reverence that made Delilah love him all the more for his capacity to honor the past while embracing the future. As August drew to a close, however, a shadow fell over their happiness. Word reached Cottonwood Springs that a band of cattle rustlers was moving through the territory, targeting isolated ranches and stealing entire herds under cover of darkness. "I'm doubling the night watch," Darren told Delilah one Sunday evening as they sat by the fireplace. Jacob had already been tucked into bed and the ranch hands were settled in the bunkhouse. "Can't afford to lose any cattle this close to the drive." "Do you think they'll come here?" Delilah asked, concern etched on her face. Darren stoked the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "Hard to say." We're remote enough to be a target, but we've got more hands than most small spreads. He sat back beside her, taking her hand. Don't worry, we'll be vigilant. She leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Just promise me you'll be careful. Jacob needs you. She hesitated before adding softly, I need you. He tilted her face up to his. I'm not going anywhere, Delilah, not when I've finally found something worth staying for. His kiss sealed the promise, but as Delilah rode back to town the next morning, an uneasy feeling lingered in her chest. Her premonition proved accurate 3 nights later when Charlie came pounding on her door well past midnight, his horse lathered from the hard ride to town. Miss Vance, he called urgently, you gotta come quick. Boss has been shot. Delilah's world tilted as she fumbled to light a lamp. Shot. How bad is it? Bad enough, Charlie replied grimly. Rustlers hit the north pasture. Boss and Hank caught him in the act, but one of the varmints got off a lucky shot before they ran off. Jacob, she asked, already grabbing her shawl. Boy's fine, just scared. Boss is asking for you. The ride to the ranch was a blur of terror and prayer. By the time they arrived, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, casting long shadows across the yard. Dr. Morris's buggy stood outside the house, and Delilah's heart seized at the sight. Inside, she found Jacob huddled in a corner of the kitchen, his eyes red from crying. He launched himself at her the moment she appeared. Miss Vance, they shot Pa, he sobbed against her skirt. There was so much blood. Delilah knelt, wrapping her arms around the trembling boy. SHH, it's all right, I'm here now. Where is your father? In his room with the doctor, Jacob hiccuped. He told me to be brave, but I'm scared. It's okay to be scared, she assured him, stroking his hair. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid, it means you keep going anyway, doctor. Morris emerged from the bedroom then, his weathered face grave but not defeated. Miss Vance, good, he's been asking for you. How is he? She asked, rising to her feet, Jacob still clinging to her hand. The bullet took him in the shoulder, missed anything vital, but he's lost a lot of blood. Next 24 hours will tell. The doctor wiped his hands on a cloth. I've done what I can, he needs rest and close watching for fever. Delilah nodded, swallowing her fear. I'll stay with him. Can I see Pa? Jacob pleaded. Dr. Morris hesitated, then nodded. Just for a minute. He needs rest. Darren lay pale against the pillows, his right shoulder swathed in bandages. His eyes, though glazed with pain, brightened when he saw them. There's my brave boy, he whispered as Jacob approached cautiously. And my Delilah. You scared us, Pa, Jacob said, his voice small. I know, son, I'm sorry. Darren reached out with his good hand to touch his son's cheek. But I'll be right as rain soon enough. Miss Vance will make sure of it. Jacob nodded solemnly. She makes everything better. A ghost of a smile touched Darren's lips. That she does. After Jacob was persuaded to go with Charlie to check on the new calves, Delilah sat beside Darren's bed, taking his hand in hers. You're not allowed to die, she informed him, tears threatening despite her attempt at firmness. I forbid it. Yes, madam, he murmured, his thumb brushing weakly across her knuckles. Wouldn't dream of crossing you. She bent to kiss his forehead, alarmed at the heat already building there. I mean it, Darren Young, you have too much to live for. His eyes, fever-bright, locked on hers. I know. I found that out when you stepped off that stagecoach. He winced as pain shot through his shoulder. Delilah, if something happens, nothing's going to happen, she interrupted fiercely. If it does, he persisted, take care of Jacob, he loves you already. I love him too, she said, tears spilling over. And I love you, you stubborn cowboy, so you need to fight. A tender smile crossed his face. I love you, Delilah Vance. Have since that first day, I think. The next 24 hours became a desperate battle against infection. Delilah barely left Darren's side, sponging his burning skin with cool water, spooning broth between his cracked lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and praying more fervently than she ever had in her life. Jacob hovered nearby, his young face solemn as he fetched fresh water and clean cloths, determined to help. Pa smiles when you're near, he told Delilah during one of Darren's fitful moments of sleep. He'll get better because you're here. By the second night, Darren's fever broke, his skin cooling beneath Delilah's trembling fingers. Dr. Morris, returning to check on his patient, declared the worst was over. "He's a strong man," the doctor said, packing away his instruments, "and he had something worth fighting for." Recovery came slowly. September arrived, bringing cooler nights and the looming challenge of the cattle drive. With Darren still weak, the responsibility fell to his foreman and the other hands, guided by Delilah's meticulous planning and unexpected talent for negotiation. "You're a natural businesswoman," Darren told her as they sat on the porch one evening in late September, his arm still in a sling but his color much improved. "Those buyers didn't stand a chance against you." Delilah laughed, leaning against his good shoulder. "I simply refuse to accept less than what our cattle are worth." "Our cattle," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." Jacob burst from the house then, clutching a letter. "It came, Pa, the money from the cattle drive." Darren took the envelope, his eyes widening as he read its contents. "This is more than we expected." He looked at Delilah in amazement. "We're clear of debt, the ranch is secure." Jacob whooped, dancing around the porch. "We're rich, not rich," Darren corrected with a laugh, "but safe. The running Y will survive." That night, after Jacob had gone to bed, Darren led Delilah to a spot beneath a massive cottonwood tree near the creek, where moonlight filtered through the leaves to dapple the ground with silver. "This was Catherine's favorite place on the ranch," he said quietly. "She used to say it was where heaven touched earth." Delilah squeezed his hand, honored by the significance of where he'd brought her. "I think she would have liked you," he continued. "Your strength, your kindness with Jacob." He turned to face her fully. "These past months you've brought life back to this ranch, to my son. To me." Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band with a single modest pearl. "It's not fancy," he said apologetically. "Times have been hard and it's perfect," Delilah interrupted, her heart swelling. Darren dropped to one knee, wincing slightly as the movement jarred his healing shoulder. "Delilah Vance, will you marry me? Be Jacob's mother and my wife. Help me build the running Y into the home it was always meant to be." Tears of joy spilled down Delilah's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, with all my heart, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to gather her in his arms, his kiss a promise of the life they would build together. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, with the entire town of Cottonwood Springs in attendance. Delilah wore a simple cream dress, adorned with desert mariposa lilies, a tribute to the flower that had first connected them. Darren, handsome in a new suit, watched with undisguised adoration as she walked toward him outside the small church. Jacob stood proudly beside his father, serving as both best man and ring bearer, his face split in a wide grin that hadn't dimmed since hearing the news of their engagement. As Delilah reached them, Jacob pressed something into her hand, a small, slightly crushed mariposa lily, just like the one he'd brought her that first evening. "Pa always smiles when you're near," he whispered, his eyes shining. "And now you'll be near forever." Delilah knelt to hug him, her heart overflowing with love for this boy who had helped bring her and Darren together. "That's right," she promised. "Forever." Standing before the minister, with Darren's hand warm in hers and Jacob beaming beside them, Delilah knew she had found her home not in the schoolhouse or even the ranch house itself, but in the hearts of the cowboy and his son who had claimed her as their own. 1 year later, Delilah stood on the porch of the running Y, watching as Darren taught Jacob to rope a practice dummy in the yard. The ranch had flourished under their joint care, the house expanded to accommodate their growing family, and a new schoolroom built where Delilah still taught the children of neighboring ranches 3 days a week. In her arms, 2-month-old Catherine Rose Young slept peacefully, her tiny fingers curled around her mother's thumb. The baby stirred, and Delilah gently rocked her, humming a soft lullaby as she watched her husband and stepson laughing together in the golden afternoon light. Darren looked up, catching her eye across the yard. The smile that spread across his face, radiant and full of love, was everything Jacob had promised that first day, the smile of a man who had found his happiness. As if sensing her thoughts, Jacob broke away from his father and ran toward the porch, a wild mariposa lily clutched in his hand. "For you, Ma," he said, presenting it with a flourish. He'd begun calling her that shortly after the wedding, the name coming as naturally to him as breathing. Delilah accepted the flower with her free hand, her heart swelling with gratitude for this family she'd found in the unlikeliest of places. "Thank you, sweetheart." Darren joined them, wrapping one arm around Delilah's waist and resting the other gently on his daughter's head. "My three favorite people in the world," he murmured, pressing a kiss to Delilah's temple. "Pa's always smiling now," Jacob observed, leaning against Delilah's side. Darren chuckled, his eyes meeting Delilah's over their children's heads. "That's because I have everything a man could want right here." He squeezed her waist gently. "And it all started with a brave schoolteacher who stepped off a stagecoach and a boy with a flower. And a cowboy who smiled," Delilah added softly, remembering that first meaningful glance across a dusty street. As the sun set over the running Y, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Delilah knew that whatever challenges life might bring, they would face them together, a family forged by love in the wild heart of the West.